And now it is the time for the sponsor perspective portion of the program. A quick clarification before we begin. While I'm conducting the interview and the questions are mine, the content of this next interview should not be considered editorial in nature. And with that, I'm joined by Dr. Moira Gilchrist, Vice President of Strategic and Scientific Communications with Philip Morris International. Moira, it's great to see you, and I know you're off in Switzerland. I wish you were here in town, so thank you so much for joining us this evening. In your Twitter feed, it said, You're a science lady, and I love that because we've had so many science ladies on today, and I want more of them. And I'm just sort of interested in, given your insights inside big companies, and you've seen universities where you did your research, do you have any pieces of advice on how we might achieve greater diversity in science?
Well, here's the thing. When I was a young scientist working in the lab, and as I started to progress through my career, I didn't really see it as being unusual being a female scientist. It wasn't really until I sort of started to progress that I understood that I was quite unusual. And I think the thing that it strikes me most is that the last thing you need in leaders of science and technology is groupthink. So what you need is the biggest amount of diversity. You need people with all sorts of different backgrounds, different education, different experience in life. And it's only by having that mix, that great mix of people, that you can really solve some of the world's biggest problems. So I would say to young women scientists, you need to persevere. You need to make sure that your voice is heard. You need to make sure that you're part of the conversation. You need to make sure that you're sharing your ideas, and keep doing it and keep doing it and keep doing it.
Well, I appreciate that, and I appreciate hearing about groupthink, because I think that's what makes scientists both interesting and annoying, because the interesting part is they have lots of insights into what we become. Annoying because they do sometimes challenge my groupthink, right? And they make us challenge our assumptions. During this pandemic, I've gone back to read many books that I should have read long ago, and reread certain books. And one of them I took a look at was Thomas Kuhn's book, Theory of Scientific Revolutions, and understanding how big scientific leaps happen, that it's not just the earnest linearity of scientific achievement. You have to undermine a whole system. You're in the tobacco industry, you've been in the tobacco industry. What have been, as you've tried to sort of bring science to better outcomes, what attitudes, what foggy thinking have you been trying to disrupt?
So I think one of the biggest challenges that we face is the lack of willingness of some groups who are probably overly influential in the field of tobacco control. Their kind of unwillingness to even look at the science that my company has developed because of who we are, because of their perception of the history that my company and the industry has. And I think that's a wasted opportunity, because science is science, and you can look at our data. We've made it all transparently open. You can look at it, you can try and replicate it to see if we're correct or incorrect, but you can't just ignore it. And I think that's what's happening in many different organizations and entities, not just in the United States, but internationally. And the challenge there is it's not my company that's going to be hurt by that. It's the billion men and women who smoke. There are almost 40 million of them in the United States that ultimately will suffer, because we're holding back progress. We're holding back progress in offering those people better alternatives.
Well, while we have a chance, and I know we don't necessarily have a show and tell set up here, but I am interested in the science of what you achieved. When I think about the pandemic and trying to develop vaccines, one of the questions I've had is, are we developing vaccines the way we did 20 years ago, or has all of this investment in genetic decoding and all sorts of other advancements in artificial intelligence and machine learning, is this helping us get to a vaccine faster? And some people tell me it may very well be happening now. And so what has science done to transform the products you're offering? I mean, what is different today than 10 years ago?
Well, I think we went through a very deliberate exercise of bringing in new thinking and bringing in new technology. So I came from the pharmaceutical industry 14 years ago to join Philip Morris International, because I had different experience than the people that were employed at the time. We brought in all sorts of different technologies to assess what we call our smoke-free products, including using cutting-edge technology like systems biology, systems toxicology. And I think we're doing doing some science there that's really cutting edge. And I do think that can help to push forward science and knowledge in this area. But at the same time, regulation, policy making needs to catch up with the science, because sometimes regulators are not just ready to use that type of technology in their decision making. So I think, yes, just as with any other area like vaccine development in our area, yes, we are bringing new technology and we are making big advances, but society sometimes is not quite ready for it.
You and I didn't pre-script these questions, so I'm going to ask you, tough ones. Part of the controversy about some of the e-cigarettes and whatnot has been marketing to children, accessibility by children, flavors, bubblegum flavors and others that children wanted. What is the view of you as a scientist about the ethical dimensions of that, and where is you as a company with regards to that practice?
So my company and me myself take this issue very seriously. I'm a mother and I understand the challenge of parenting teenagers. But we have to be very clear, these products are not for youth and they're not for people who do not already smoke. And we've been very, very conscious about making sure that we're marketing and selling these products to the right audience, which is adults who would otherwise continue to smoke, and not to unintended audiences like youth. And I think our own track record in that regard is very, very good. Now, when it comes to flavors, we have to separate out the way flavors are marketed. Now, we do see marketing that's not helpful in any way, shape, or form, with the very unhelpful descriptors and so on, cartoons and so on. But that's separate from the product itself. So flavored products can play a role in helping adults who would otherwise continue to smoke to switch to a better alternative. We see this in countries outside of the United States very, very clearly with our lead heated tobacco product. So we need to separate that out. And I think that's why we're relying on agencies like the Food and Drug Administration in the United States, who have authority over these products, to look at all of the evidence and make the decision of whether a product, whether it's flavored or not flavored, is appropriate to either protect or promote the public health. And that's the job that they're doing today.
Moira, are you looking at things like cancer incidence and whatnot as your new products, your I don't know how to say it, your non-combustible tobacco products? I've been doing some studying. But as those are moved to heated smoke, in a place like Japan. So the take-up of these products in Japan is staggering. It's huge. At what point, as a scientist, take off your Philip Morris hat, at what point might you be hoping to see whether there end up being positive health benefits in that transition? What would be a realistic and fair timetable?
So this is one of the biggest scientific challenges in my field. So diseases like cancer, as you mentioned, take many, many years to manifest themselves and become diagnosable. So we won't know the true answer to that for potentially decades. But what we can look for is signals that things are beginning to change. So we can look in a pre-market setting as to whether adults who switch to this product from cigarettes actually are exposed to lower levels of carcinogens, because we know that it's the carcinogens that end up causing the cancer over the long term. So if you're exposed to less, then it's less likely that you would develop a cancer in the long term. So that's pre-market evidence that can be helpful and instructive. But now when we're in the situation in Japan, we've been on the market there for probably more than 5 years now. So we can start to look at things like hospital admissions for not necessarily cancer, but we could look at things like chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. We can look at heart and heart problems. And so that's work that we're starting to do now, is looking to see if there's a change in the incidence of diseases that we know are related to smoking. But it's early days.
One of the fun things that I've really enjoyed today, we've had such a vast array of unbelievably brilliant and talented people. And in a way, each one of them have had to deal with foggy thinking, somewhere that they had to undo, to unsmoke their minds, which I know has been an element of your work. I'm just interested in, as you've worked in this field around the world, do you find ecosystems in science that where they lean in a little bit more on scientific inquiry and being open-minded, or is it a fight everywhere?
I'm sorry, I missed just the last portion of what you said there.
I just said, when you kind of look around the world in the various places you operate, and you as a scientist, maybe even with your own company, we've had a lot of people and many women today, all who've had to try to, unsmoke people's minds, to defog people's minds, to sort of, change the direction. And right now, science is controversial in America in a weird way. And so I'm just sort of interested, do you see places from your experience or environments that kind of get it right? Because I believe in show and tell, that if there are environments where open-mindedness, leaning in on science, which I think America used to be. I have doubts now, but I'm just wondering if from your own experience around the world, who gets it right, and what can we learn from them?
Well, I think nobody gets it perfectly right, and I think particularly in the field that I work in, given that it's so controversial. But I'm ever an optimist, and I think the great thing about science is that eventually it becomes impossible to hide, it becomes impossible not to see it. So I think over the long term, science is a process, and we start to get closer and closer to what we would call the truth. And I think it requires a bit of patience, and it requires, as you say, an open mind. And I think many of your guests earlier have pointed to this. There's not one single answer that's going to appear overnight. It takes time. I think with an open mind, with patience, and with casting aside our prejudices, we can solve many of the world's biggest problems through science and technology.
Well, with that, I want to thank Moira Gilchrist, Vice President for Science and Strategic Communications, for joining us today and for supporting today's program. It's been an outstanding array of conversations. Thank you for helping to make it happen.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you.